and welcome. This is your host, Garima. And joining me on the Dais today is Mr. Stuart Broadley. He's the CEO of Energy Industries Council. I'm so pleased to have you here with me today, sir, and looking forward to learning from you today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for inviting me, and looking forward to trying to answer your difficult questions.
I hope so, sir. So let's begin with your story. What motivated you to join the energy sector? What has been your why?
Well, it's maybe not the answer you expected, but I started out in the aerospace sector actually after university, and it was an amazing industry, and I learned a lot. But I very quickly, because I was married straight after university, so I quickly had 4 children. And so unfortunately, the aerospace industry was great in terms of learning, but not great in terms of earning. So in order to start repaying some of my debts, I looked around for other jobs. And that's in the end why I went to the oil and gas sector. I moved within the UK to Aberdeen in Scotland, and I joined the oil and gas industry, and immediately then moved from the UK to Calgary on my first posting. And of course, that had an amazing journey, if you like, within the energy sector. But the truth is, I moved because the aerospace industry wasn't paying me enough as a young engineer.
Right. And sir, moving from one industry to another, the transition must have been difficult for you initially. How did you face all of that, and what were some of the particular challenges that you experienced?
I think the main challenge I've experienced, because I've moved different industries 2 or 3 times, is I guess I normally assume when I make the move that a lot of my previous contacts and skills will directly apply. Normally that's not true. Normally there are some things that are transferable, but most things are not. So it's a kind of indirect learning that you can transfer, but a lot of the direct skills and contacts and culture of an industry you have to learn again. I'm the kind of person who loves new challenges and learning new things and meeting new people. So for me, actually, that was one of the things I loved about moving industries, was that kind of steep learning curve. But I think for some people, actually, moving industries probably is quite stressful. So I was lucky. I did it a few times and I loved it.
Right. And sir, what were some of the roles that you took up in the industry? How has your career path been? If we start right from the beginning, when you joined the industry and to your journey so far.
Yeah, as I say, I started in the aerospace industry as a manufacturing systems engineer, so designing factory layouts for optimized production. And then I moved into the military equipment, I suppose, next. This was all in the UK. And really from there, though, as I say, suddenly I had 4 children and I was in, quite a lot of financial trouble. So those first 2 steps were really about engineering skills, both manufacturing and design skills. But then I moved into the energy industry pretty quickly after that, when I was, I suppose, about late 20s in age. And from then on, I was in the same role, really, for nearly 20 years, which was global service. So for nearly 20 years, I ran global service businesses for oil and gas industry, and then conventional power industry, then the renewable industry for onshore and offshore wind turbines, and then into the downstream sector as well for a technology business. So always running relatively complex global service businesses. So I goes over those 20 years. I really learned the value of listening to customers, building solutions that work for customers. And then, of course, latterly, that all came together with this role I now have as CEO at the EIC, which is a great privilege. It's an institution that's been around since 1943. And I think I got this job because I actually do have experience in all the different energy sectors,
Right.
And oil and gas and conventional power, even a bit of nuclear power, renewable power. By the way, it wasn't a career plan, though. I didn't map out my plan that I wanted to be in each step of the energy sector. It just kind of happened by luck. But it's worked out to be lucky in the end for this job.
Right.
So this job is the perfect job. So EIC covers all energy sectors. It is global. So yeah, it's been a good fit for me.
Right, right. And sir, what is the story of Energy Industries Council? If we talk about the particular challenges in the industry value chain, how would you help us understand where does EIC fit in today, and what kind of problems does it intend to solve?
So I always tell this story of kind of what's our purpose in the same way, which is I go back to 1943 when EIC was started. It was still the Second World War, and 13 British companies that were involved in the supply chain for back then kind of power generation equipment, big manufacturing companies, who of course really were in financial trouble because of the war and were looking for ways to start to grow again and win new business. Right. So we were created by those 13 companies to really help them do one thing, which was to get into the oil and gas industry for the first time. And back in the 40s, oil and gas was just starting in the Middle East, very early stage. There was no real oil and gas in the UK. So of course, in order to access oil and gas, we had to help businesses do two things. Right. They were currently in power generation, so we had to help them diversify into oil and gas. And they were currently mainly UK focused, and we had to help them export to the Middle East. So diversification, exporting, that's really what we were set up to do, and that's what we do today. That's still our key purpose. Right. Is we're a not-for-profit trade association. We're the largest energy trade body in the UK and one of the largest in the world. And our job is to help member companies to win business around the world, so exporting from the UK and diversifying across all energy sectors. Many companies, of course, are in oil and gas, but now actually we're diversifying them back from oil and gas into power generation again. Of course, that is now renewable power. We do this in terms of helping member companies to win business around the world in three ways. Data. So we have world-leading data on where are the best opportunities around the world, whether they're CAPEX, new projects, or whether they're OPEX, so service business on existing energy facilities, but across the whole energy space. So we have really very good data to help companies target where's the best opportunity around the world. Then we do events. We do 130 events every year. And at the moment, they are virtual events like this. Those are to connect the key decision makers around the world for these projects with supply chain companies. Of course, who are all wanting to pre-qualify and then win that business. Right. And then thirdly, the thing we do is insight. So because we work with the British and Scottish government a lot, we're not funded by them, but we're close partners to them. And we work with boards of companies all over the world and energy ministries all over the world and embassies all over the world. We are privileged, and I personally am very privileged to get great understanding, very early understanding of trends in the industry, of key changes in thinking. And my job is to kind of share that insight without breaking confidentiality. As quickly as I can back to industry. Right. So that kind of insight, and I can share some of that perhaps today in this interview, but I'm constantly trying to help businesses, decision makers, ministers, thought leaders to get early insight so that they can not make mistakes in their investments.
Right, right. And so talking about diversification, what would you say about the energy transition that is happening in the industry so far? How has the narrative shifted from being an oil and gas community to gradually becoming an energy platform for the world?
Okay, so this is something that I personally did in my career because I went from oil and gas to renewable, and I know how difficult it was to transfer oil and gas skills into offshore and onshore wind. So I think the first thing I would say is that it is amazing, it's surprising, and it's compelling how fast European oil companies have decided to shed their old oil and gas clothes, if you like, and put on these kind of new integrated energy company clothes, trying to, as fast as they can, satisfy the demands of their shareholders and activists and their young employees who really require of them to take a more social contract,
Right.
social responsibility, if you like, for what they do, obviously for the benefit of the planet. And it's amazing how, when you look at, of course, the key emitters of CO2 around the world, yeah, it's true, oil companies tend to come at the top of that list. So what the first thing I would say in answer to your question is, this is not yet a global trend of oil companies moving into renewables.
Right.
It is a European trend.
Right.
And it's definitely true if you look at BP and Shell and Equinor and Total and Eni and others in that region, that they are now making brave, really courageous policy statements and promises to their shareholders and their employees about their steps towards achieving net zero carbon or some level of decarbonization in tangible ways.
Right.
And of course, if you look at kind of example of BP, could have just recently put out announcements that more than just very long-term goals, they now have put in 9-year goals, 2030 goals, to cut oil production by 40%. And that's really to sell oil assets in order to fund investments then to grow into renewables. So what is energy transition, though? Because it's a hyper topic that everybody currently talks about.
Right.
Literally everybody wants to know, what is energy transition and what are the opportunities? How can I do it? The truth is, even for the oil companies, for most of the companies, energy transition in terms of the newer technologies is something that everybody talks about and nearly nobody does. So I guess in terms of what advice would I give to people that are looking at energy transition as an opportunity, it is not yet a financial opportunity for most businesses. When you think about energy transition in terms of hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, maybe nuclear SMRs, floating offshore wind, energy storage. So these are the kind of new technologies that everybody talks about as energy transition. Still, for almost everywhere in the world, the real opportunities are still in basically what you would call renewable technology. So what came before the energy transition technology, of course, is renewable technology. So wind, solar, and the circular economy of recycle and reuse. Most nations of the world are still very early in their journey of implementing those technologies to the full extent. So if you're in Western Europe, most countries have achieved 30 or 40% of their power generation now from renewable technology, and the UK actually is the world leader in offshore wind production. You go to most other countries of the world, they're way, way behind. And so in terms of companies wanting to know where to invest, or heads of state wanting to know where to prioritize, still for most people, it's do the basics. Do wind and solar and the circular economy, because the technology is established and very cheap now. It's a global supply chain that can support almost any industry that wants to, or any decision maker that wants to move into that industry. And actually, there are regulatory and funding models that governments can easily use to create the demand for that model. To go into hydrogen, CCS and others is much more difficult. It's not yet industrialized or commoditized, so very expensive. So I think energy transition is a technology for the future, whereas renewables is still the technology of today.
And so in the same context, how important it is to have a dialogue with the climate change activists out there, how fair or unfair it is, according to you, to blame the oil and gas community for anything that's going wrong with the environment. Because to with all the industry leaders that I have been talking to lately, they always say this one thing, that it's very important to communicate the right story about the oil and gas industry. There is so much that we are also doing in a responsible manner. So that part also needs to be highlighted. Where do you think the debate is at this point of time?
As I said, the main emitters around the world are oil companies. And I think it is now time for those companies to address those emissions.
Mm-hmm.
It should be part of their social contract.
Right.
It's less about corporate, it's more about being kind of members of this world
Mm-hmm.
and caring about the planet. And I think it's a good move now
Mm-hmm.
that those business leaders, boards of those companies, shareholders of those companies are making those changes or forcing those changes. And
Right.
actually, activism works, and that's a good sign of it, because I think activism accelerated those changes. And I would
Mm-hmm.
say, if you go to, say, an American oil company
Mm-hmm.
boardroom,
Mm-hmm.
they're not yet making those real changes and commitments because activism is not so successful in the US.
Right.
It
Right.
does depend where you are. But I would also say that, I mean, I know a lot of the business leaders in these businesses, and these are people who want to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, I think for them, this is now an amazing opportunity to balance the financial pressure of being CEO of a large energy business with the sort of social responsibilities of being a family person, of employing thousands of people, of being part of a community, and of wanting to have a planet which is sort of amazing to live in and healthy to live in the future. And I think now it's an amazing time to run an oil business.
Yeah.
And I think if I look forward, so predict forward 10 or 20 years, there will be winners and losers in the oil industry. And the winners will be those leaders and those businesses that embrace this change, and embrace it in an authentic way. So what I mean
Okay.
is, some leaders you kind of wonder, they're saying it because shareholders want them to say it, but do they mean it? And others, you just know, you look in their eyes and you know, I believe that leader,
Right.
that I think they really want to do this. And I'm not going to suggest, name any of those people, but I think as sort of employees looking into the businesses they work for, or maybe looking at other businesses, you should be working for someone who says these things about commitments for the future in a believable, authentic way.
Absolutely, absolutely, sir. And now we know that how cyclical this industry is. There have been so many downturns. And considering your experience, how are you looking at COVID-19 and its impact on the industry? And how do you find it different from the previous challenges the industry has faced?
When I was talking to companies at the start of the year, everybody felt after 5 tough years since the
Mm-hmm.
last oil crisis of 2014,
Mm-hmm.
that 2020 was going to be the first good year.
Right.
And everybody was excited about it, feeling like at last we're starting to make good money again. And then,
Right.
of course, COVID hit. So, yes, of course, COVID in many ways is unprecedented, and no one's seen anything like it. But in the energy industry, in many ways, it's created similar types of problems to
Mm-hmm.
what the energy industry normally sees in a market crisis. So,
Right.
a fast reduction in demand for products and services, of course, much more competition, tighter prices and margins, and fast decisions are made. So what I would say is about kind of how does it feel this time compared to previous times is certainly in the last crisis,
Mm-hmm.
when we at ZIC interviewed business leaders, asking how did they react to the last crisis, they took too long. They took 1 to 2 years
Mm-hmm.
to decide whether this was a serious crisis back in 2014, or maybe it would rebound pretty quickly.
Right.
That gap of 1 to 2 years before they took the ultimately the right decisions to permanently resize and redifferentiate their businesses
Mm-hmm.
hurt the industry a lot. This time, businesses reacted in weeks and months. It's amazing how fast they reacted in comparison. And it seems to have been the case in many parts of the world, but particularly in the energy sector in the UK, I think businesses really were much more resilient than I expected and than they were 5 years ago.
Right.
Why is this? Firstly, they have less debt
Mm-hmm.
now
Mm-hmm.
than they did 5 years ago. Secondly, they are much more de-risked now than they were 5 years. What I mean is that they are reliant now on maybe 4 or 5 different sectors for their revenues, where 5 years ago many businesses were still basically oil and gas businesses. And of course, companies were so damaged by being over reliant on oil and gas last time that they're not going to let that happen again.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, I'm seeing the re-emergence of real entrepreneurial leadership in businesses, large and small. People are seeing now there's amazing opportunities from this crisis. And there is this kind of saying, which is never waste a good crisis.
Yeah.
And I think business leaders now are starting to embrace that idea and are starting to make investment decisions again.
Right, right. And sir, in the same context, how do you think this particular pandemic is redefining operations, workforce, and technology? You did touch upon a few aspects here and there, but if we talk specifically about the way business was done in the industry, and now slowly we are turning towards collaboration as well to a large extent, how are you looking at things amidst all of this?
Okay, well, the first most basic answer is companies are at last adopting digital technology in many parts of their business.
Yes.
And actually, of course, what's very interesting is digital was a hyper topic about 3 years ago in the industry. The kind of global energy industry, almost every conference you went to was talking about digital,
Right.
because energy industry was seen as way behind making the
Right.
changes that other sectors have made. So our research shows, though, that in the last 3 years, companies tried digital and then kind of gave up a bit in the energy sector, because they actually found it really hard to scale up what they'd done, to sell to customers, because customers in the energy industry are still very conservative.
Right.
And ultimately, the margins were very small. So, okay, digital, of course, is one of the things, but not as much as you'd think in the energy industry. Ultimately, the major change that perhaps industry didn't even realize it had to solve this until COVID came along was the challenge of meeting new customers when you can't travel
Right.
and when people don't really want to meet strangers.
Right.
So how do you do that? And that is reinventing the way business development works. And just a couple of very simple things that businesses should be doing now, but many are still not. One is cut travel budgets permanently. Stop waiting for it must be me that travels and I need to go 5 times to build the trust. And only when I'm happy do we then make an investment. That's not going to work anymore, because even if you are allowed to travel, the person you're going to meet, a key decision maker in a country somewhere in the world, may be nervous about meeting you.
Right.
And you may make a terrible mistake of reaching for a handshake and really insulting him, when, of course, in a COVID world, that's what you shouldn't do. So don't take that risk. Use the money you've saved from not traveling and employ people around the world in those key markets. People that were born there, live there, and understand more than just now culture issues of language and religion and sport and all the other things that matter, but also they understand the COVID culture of how to meet and greet, which coffee shop to go to. So I think that's the first most important change that companies can make. And then the other one is, if you're trying to, let's talk about, say, an example of an industry, the event industry. You're trying to start rebuilding your events business. How do you do it? And I told you, we do 130 events a year, and this absolutely affects us. We can no longer have events which are kind of lazy events. What I mean is that everybody turns up, there's no worry about safety, and they all sit close together and they all sit all day listening to presentations. And then they might meet some random people in an unstructured networking event. Those days are gone. So now what you need to think about is, if you want to take the decision to bring people together in a COVID situation, so safety is now the number one priority. How do you do it and why do you do it? And so firstly, you no longer need everybody sitting there all day listening to presentations, because that can all be done now digitally. So what is an event for? It is, of course, then to meet people. It's about networking, and that has to be done in a safe way, in a fun way, and in an organized way, so that it's done efficiently and safely. So actually, today, no one has solved that problem. So it's an example of, there are amazing opportunities now for business leaders to differentiate, make a lot of money, being the organizations that work out how to turn COVID to their advantage. And that's kind of my main view right now of what is the impact of pandemic on business. It's moved from what am I going to do? I'm waiting for the old times to come back very quickly now to how can I take advantage of this? This is such a chance to innovate. And if I do it quickly, I will be the first and I will make a lot of money.
Right, right, right. And sir, if I may ask, how has all of this affected your personal life and what do you miss the most?
Well, obviously, well, you probably don't know this, but my home is in Aberdeen and
Mm-hmm.
my office is in
Mm-hmm.
London. So actually, it's affected my personal and business life a lot
Right.
because I used to commute most weeks from Aberdeen to London in order to work.
Mm-hmm.
Or I was traveling all over the world, running conferences and chairing events and meeting important people in order to open doors for British businesses to win business in the future. None of that works anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, firstly, I'm now at home a lot more, which is, an amazing and surprising outcome of this. Secondly, I'm much better at talking to screens than I was before. And I really now value and understand the importance and the place of webinars and digital media a lot more than I did before. But thirdly, it has made me think hard about what's the future of the industry and what's the role of an organization like EIC, because
Mm-hmm.
okay, there are so many things changing now. And I mean, from a UK point of view, as well as, kind of energy transition and COVID and the financial implications of all
Mm-hmm.
of that, we also have Brexit,
Yes.
which isn't something that I really, get to talk about much, other than to say that it's just another major challenge for
Right.
business in the UK. And so there is real work to be done collaboratively now between industry and government at the highest level and on a global basis to make sure we have clear policies for how we're going to approach business in this new world and to make sure that key resources that we have, money and people, are allocated in the right way.
Right, right. And sir, what do you think is here to stay and what would really go beyond this crisis? Because we are completely in a new terrain and we do not know how things will evolve, but we can only imagine a few things and we can just predict accordingly. But what is your take on this?
I touched before on digital and on
Yeah.
how it was increasing in popularity in the energy sector and then reducing again. It was reducing because hard to scale, hard to sell,
Right.
and low margin. I actually think that COVID may be an opportunity for the digital industry in the energy sector because now, if you want to solve a safety problem in the energy environments, let's say you need to have less people on a platform because they have to socially distance, or
Right.
let's say you need to have an emergency response program so that if there's an infection on a platform, you can bring people off fast and quickly and you can then trace everybody else that they've been in contact with.
Right.
Let's say you want to design a new working practice where you can't have people, if you like, designing the working practice because they can't go there because there are too many people there already. So then they perhaps could use a digital twin to design that working practice. All of these things now are safety reasons
Mm-hmm.
to use digital products that are widely available and used widely in many other sectors, but not in the energy environment. So I actually think one of the industries that will benefit from COVID in the energy sector is the whole digital industry.
Right.
Now, it can be summed up as it's going to benefit because um, digital is now a must have, not a nice to have. And it's a must have that sits now on the table of the CEO and the health and safety executive of each large energy business, whether it's a nuclear plant or an oil industry or a renewable wind farm. And what an opportunity that is, as long as those digital providers change their message now. They have to stop selling, we provide efficiency and optimization, and now they have to start selling, we provide ways for you to work safely. So I think that's just one example of how industry can take advantage and really be impacted by COVID.
Right, right. And now, sir, what is your message for the global energy community? Because These are definitely hard times, and what would you tell them?
I would tell them two things. I would say, firstly, grab the opportunity now to decarbonize the world.
Mm-hmm.
There is now, as well as a growing societal and activism drive for this, and many parents of children know that their children are expecting their parents, who may be running businesses, to make the right decisions. But now, as well as all of that pressure, governments, I think, are seriously considering how to kickstart their own economies again, following the slow, understanding of how to manage COVID. And those governments are looking for projects to invest in their countries that create skills, build infrastructure, but actually are consistent with the long-term strategy and policies of those countries.
Mm-hmm.
What better set of projects can they put in place than decarbonisation projects? So I think that's the first one. And that message goes out to all heads of state, all business leaders, but actually everybody else that has a family member that's in a key decision-making role. You should be pressurising them now, politely, nicely, to take advantage of this time. And the last thing I would say, the second thing I would say is, many people, I think, in their personal lives and in their business lives are looking around, still feeling like, is it safe? Is it time yet to start going outside again and making decisions again?
Mm-hmm.
And it's clear, I think, if you speak to the medical community, that COVID's not going to really go away. We are learning how to manage it so that the infection rate is low.
Right.
But in the end, it's still dangerous. So I think the final piece of advice I give is, if you accept that this is the new world now, and that actually will kind of make you feel better, if you kind of say, this is it now, we're not going to, there might be a vaccine, we'd all love a vaccine, but it's not going to happen quickly.
Right.
So I'm not going to wait anymore. I'm not going to put my life on hold anymore, my personal life and my business life. So the key message is, stop waiting, start adapting to this new world. There are opportunities there, grab them.
That's a very important and empowering message, sir. Thank you so much for that. And on the final note, sir, how do you look back on your journey in the energy sector, and what are some of the milestones that you're looking forward to?
Well, I'm very fortunate now to be in a role where I'm helping other people in their businesses. And I know how hard it was when I was running businesses you just think you're in a stable position, and then something happens and there's a huge disruption and you have to go back and redesign again. So, I mean, firstly, what I'm lucky enough to do now is, in the small way that I can, to help businesses to be slightly better prepared for this incredibly disruptive world. And it feels like, just when we think, okay, at last it might be getting a bit stable, something even worse happens. So, and that's the first thing I'd say that I'm kind of accepting is now part of life, and that's part of my role. And I think that the second thing is that I'm now trying to encourage the future leaders of our industry to get involved. I think there is a temptation still to feel that oil and gas, using that terminology, is a little bit behind as an energy industry. And could be doing more to get involved in making the world a better place to live, and obviously decarbonizing and being part of the journey towards achieving our global temperature limits that we all know are so important to do. My belief now is that business leaders in oil and gas, and of course also in nuclear and other energy sectors, they actually now generally want to do the right thing. And what they need now are talented people to join their businesses to help them make the change. And it's amazing now how business leaders are listening completely and openly and constantly to their employees and to their stakeholders and the wide community to understand what is required of them and how they can make a difference for their business and for the sort of environment that they work within. So I think to those younger people out there that are thinking about, should I move into the energy sector or not, into the oil and gas sector or not, now is a great time to do it. It's a great industry, amazing technology, very global, So a lot of personal career development potential, but most importantly, the industry needs young people now to come in and create that groundswell of optimism and passion to accelerate the industry even more.
Absolutely, absolutely, sir. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Dais, sharing your story, and for helping us understand so many dynamics that are at play in the industry and how things have evolved over the years. And it has been absolutely delightful learning all these aspects from you. Thank you once again.
Thank you.